Good morning, and welcome to the Virtual Unitarian Universalist Church of the Monterey Peninsula. My name is Paige Galloway, and I am currently concluding my tenure as the president of your Board of Trustees. Thank you so very much for giving me the opportunity to serve. We are a congregation of people of different ages, races, classes, religious and sexual orientations, gender identities, and political views. Our purpose is to change our own lives, even as we work to change the world through love, learning, and service to others. This month's worship theme is integrity. Today's worship service is led by Worship Associate Karen Brown, and please, a special warm UUCMP welcome to our guest speaker, Stephen Goings. They are a leader in Monterey Peninsula Pride, the NAACP, and Cal State University, Monterey Bay. You should have received a link to our order of service in Friday's email. You can also always find a link to Sunday services on the church website. The church office and church buildings are closed, but church life continues by phone, email, and through Zoom meetings. Please contact the office either by email or by phone if you would like to receive our email weekly news, which has more information about church activities and initiatives and how you can stay involved in church life. Do you have ideas about how our church can participate in social justice movements? Please share your ideas with the Social Justice Committee Chair, Dennis Hickman, and please join us on the first Sunday of the month after our services for our monthly Zoom meeting. To be included in social justice emails, please contact Nibs McCarthy. Our shared offering recipient for June is the Center for Farm Worker Families. Half of our cash collected and checks that are designated for the Center for Farm Worker Families will go to support this group. Please consider sending checks to the church office and contribute through our church website using PayPal. Just click on the donate button at the upper right-hand corner of the homepage. And now, please enjoy our musical prelude.
Quando você está por perto, você me levou ao delírio, por isso eu confesso, os seus beijos são ardentes. Quando você se aproxima, o meu corpo sente, os seus beijos são ardentes. Quando você se aproxima, o meu corpo sente. Formamos bel casal, somos dois namorados no swing dessa banda. Balançamos forte alicerce que tem nesse mundo. O cupido me flechou. Foi no bloco Lodum que encontrei o meu amor. Vem pra cá, deusa do amor. Vem e bala, nenê, param, pam, panam. Param, pam, panam. Tudo fica mais bonito quando você está por perto. Você me levou ao delírio, por isso eu confesso. Os seus beijos são ardentes. Quando você se aproxima, o meu corpo sente. Os seus beijos você se aproximar, meu corpo sente. Vem pra cá, deusa do amor, vem embalar. Vejam o blúculo do mar passar na avenida. Todos cantando felizes de bem com a vida, caminhando lado a lado. Formamos um belo casal, somos dois namorados no swing dessa banda. Balança mais forte, alicerce que tem nesse mundo. O cupido me flechou. Foi no bloco Lodum que encontrei o meu amor. Vem pra cá, deusa do amor. Vem, baram, pam, pará. Param, pam, pará. Param, pam, pará. Param, pam, pará.
Good morning. Today's call to worship was written by Sharon Wiley for the Transgender Day of Visibility. It works perfectly for all of us today. We speak so often of brokenness in religious life. Let us speak today of wholeness. You are welcome here. All of you. All of you. Every part of you, beautiful, just the way you are. Every part of you, beautiful. Here you do not need to be something more or something less. No holding back, no hiding, no exerting yourself, no trying to do more, to be more. You have inherent worth and dignity. Nothing to prove here. Nothing to prove to me or the person next to you on your screen or to the children or to anyone. You don't have to try and be witty or more quiet or more outgoing. You are beautiful. Every part of you beautiful, just the way you are. You do not need to change anything about yourself to be welcome here. Your skin, your hair, your belly, your limbs, your face, all beautiful, just the way they are. You are extraordinary. Each and every one of you different from each and beautiful in your own beautiful way. Let us worship together.
Our hymn of the month comes to us from our Justice Choir songbook. It is called I Lift My Voice. It's really fun. I think you'll pick it up pretty fast. All right, ready?
When I lift my voice, let it be in song, a defiant note in the face of wrong. I won't stand alone, we'll stand side by side, 'cause we know that love is always justified. When they try to divide us, it will only unite us. I lift my voice. When I lift my voice, let it be for good. Let me care as much as I know I should. I won't stand alone,
And now, with Unitarian Universalists throughout the world, we light our chalice, the symbol of our covenanted aspirations of love, of hope, and of justice. I'll begin with the words of the leader, and then, after I've lit the chalice, ask you to join in for the response. We gather together as a community of memory and hope to celebrate life and its infinite possibilities for love. We light this chalice as a symbol of the light within every human heart. May our individual sparks meet and merge, bringing both light and warmth to the world. Our story for all ages today is entitled Not Quite Narwhal, Words and Pictures by Jessie Seema. You probably already know that narwhal is the name of one type of very real whales. Not quite narwhal. Something special happening here. Kelp was born deep in the ocean. He knew very early on that kelp was different from the other narwhals. His tusk wasn't as long as everyone else's. Wow. And kelp had different tastes in food. Look at his little tongue is out going. And he wasn't very good at swimming. But kelp's friends didn't seem to mind. So kelp didn't mind either. Then, one day, he was swept away in a strong current. Oh, I wish I were a better swimmer. And kelp found himself at the surface, closer to land than he'd ever been before. And high up on a cliff, he spotted a mysterious, sparkling creature. It looked kind of familiar. It looked like kelp. Kelp swam toward land as fast as he could. Well, you remember, that wasn't very fast at all. Hoping he could catch up with the creature that looked just like him. When he finally reached the shore, kelp felt a little anxious. He had never left the ocean, you know. He was nervous about walking for the very first time. But the land creatures made it look easy. He tried. Oof! It wasn't easy. Ow! But eventually he got the hang of it. Everything on land was strange and beautiful, but also kind of scary. Kelp began to think he might never find the creature that looked just like him. But as he stumbled out of the forest, land narwhals! Actually, we're unicorns, and by the looks of it, so are you. Now, Kelp had never heard of unicorns before. They taught him all sorts of new things about the tusk. Well, we call them unicorns. Wow! And they introduced him to unicorn delicacies, the unicone, it says on the cart. And they showed him how to gallop. There was no doubt that Kelp was, in fact, a unicorn. He was having so much fun, he didn't want to leave. But then he remembered all of his friends under the sea. Kelp missed them terribly, so he said goodbye to the unicorns and returned to the ocean. Kelp swam for home as fast as he could go, which you'll remember wasn't very fast at all, hoping that the narwhals would still like him now that he was a unicorn. When he finally arrived, Kelp had butterflies in his stomach. He was nervous. There was a big sign, "Welcome home," and his friends called out, "Kelp, Kelp!" Kelp took a big breath and told his friends the news. It turns out I'm not a narwhal. Of course you're not. I'm a unicorn. We all knew that. They took it quite well. Kelp was happy to be home, but now that he'd experienced life on land with the unicorns, he couldn't forget them. Did Kelp want to be a land narwhal with the unicorns? Or a sea unicorn with the narwhals? Kelp couldn't decide. But then he realized that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to choose. Maybe he didn't have to choose. I've always been serious about my religious values. As a child, I wanted to be a minister. I led my family in prayers, and I felt quite guilty when I sinned. So the day I stole a 2-cent mint, my parents knew immediately. My misery from the mismatch between my values and my actions gave me away. Misery was a cloud, like a temporary bruise that covered my face. My head hung down, my feet dragged. As a teenager, trying to control my developing forbidden sexuality, I became better at deception. But when I was found out, I was threatened, as many LGBTQ plus people have been, with being sent away to be fixed to a mental hospital. As a sexually and politically active young adult with many lesbian friends, I felt a bit the way a former UUCMP member did at other churches. He said, "This is the first church where I don't have to leave a part of myself in the parking lot." Well, I continued to hide a part of myself into my 30s, affecting my family relationships as secrets and lying always will. Eventually, I rejected the whole notion of sin and church. Then I became a UU. And now My values and my actions match. I feel I'm my true self, my whole self. One way I proudly live my UU values, my principles, is by participating in political actions for worth and dignity and peace and justice. Another is by teaching OWL, the UU Sex Education and More program. The curriculum for teens, youngsters, and oldsters combines positive sexuality and UU spirituality. Now I'm out about being a sexual person, a fairly straight person. In OWL, we celebrate all sexual orientations, hetero or homosexuality, bisexuality, or more fluidity, plurality of attraction, sometimes proudly proclaiming queer. OWL also teaches respect for all gender identities, cisgender or cis, like me, people whose feelings pretty much match our bodies and society's expectations. And OWL respects people who feel or know that their identity is not what society expects, as well as those whose identity may be amazingly open, like UU spirituality, to questioning, and again, proudly queer. As a young parent, I agreed with another UUCMP member who said, "We'd all like to protect our kids from the possibility of having to grow up gay or lesbian in a homophobic world. We can't do that by trying to keep our kids from being who they are. We can only do that by making a world that is no longer homophobic, by growing them a home where they can discover their true selves." That's why I brought my daughter to this church home and to OWL classes, and why I keep trying to make sure others know about Unitarian Universalism. Because many people are wishing for a church that proclaims the worth and dignity of all and offers support for everyone's search for truth and meaning. Through welcoming diverse gender identities and orientations and supporting, proclaiming spirituality and sexuality together, we help everyone to feel free to be our true selves, to feel whole. Once, I lived in New York during a mysterious, heartbreaking epidemic. Sadness, candles everywhere. The president, though, let 6 years pass before he even acknowledged AIDS or allocated any funds for research. When the toll of American lives reached 100,000, the New York Times had an inch-long article, an inch, on page 18. Yet the city was filled with a remarkable spirit of courage, of creativity, and committed struggle for a more just world. To remember and to honor and to bring that queer spirit, much needed today. Let's sing.
And now please join as we sing the courage to be who we are.
We are here in the memory of those who have fallen, those who have fallen, those who have fallen. We are here in the memory
This now is the time we take each week to pause and reflect on the events of our lives, to think about the people that we love and care about, whether they're close or far away. Today, our Caring Network shares with us two joys. Happy 8th birthday to Abby Pye Grimmer. And joyful good wishes go out to Walt Beam, who is celebrating his 81st birthday on June 30th. Each of us brings with us today our own joys and sorrows. There are many events in the world, oh boy, and in our personal lives that are on our minds and in our hearts. We'll be dropping pebbles representing these joys and concerns into our shared waters of love and support. Any of you so moved are welcome to share a personal joy or sorrow with all of us using that chat button right at the bottom of your screen and typing a message. Please keep in mind, though, that if you type your joy or concern in the chat, it may be more public than you realize because of the joy of so many people tuning into this service from other places. If you have a more private or confidential joy or concern, please contact the pastoral associates or the Caring Network. If you don't know how, the office can tell you how to reach them. Now, please join with me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. After a segment from a piece by Alex Capitan, a genderqueer young person, there will be a few moments of silence. Spirit of many names and no name at all, may we see beyond our dependence on opposites, transcend our desire to know who is like us and who is not. May we bless those who embody juxtaposition, who can tell stories written on their bodies about both and neither, who carry intimate pieces of the truth that there is no such thing as opposites. Spirit of many names and no name at all, help us find release from our belief that all things must be either or. This belief that walls us off from one another, ensnaring us in a battle of same versus different. Help us to open our minds, to deeply listen, and to truly know one another. Finally, glimpsing the kaleidoscopic beauty of the divine. This now is the time for our morning offering. We invite you to think about your financial support for this church and our desire to serve a greater good. We encourage you to write a check and drop it in the mail, or even better, 2 checks, one for our church and one for our shared offering recipient, the Center for Farm Worker Families. Simply write Center for Farm Worker Families in the memo line, or you can follow the donate buttons on our website, uucmp.org, and use PayPal. And now, please enjoy the offertory music. Our reading this morning is a litany by Elizabeth Ketchum. I invite you to respond to each line that I say with the words, "May we live the spirit of pride." With gratitude for the freedom to be our true, authentic selves, may we live the spirit of pride. With the courage that comes from challenging fear, may we live the spirit of pride. With sorrow for those who could not be with us today, and in honor of those who died of AIDS or who lost their lives to violence, may we live the spirit of pride. With grief for those whose pain was unbearable and who left us too soon, may we live the spirit of pride. Looking ahead to the justice still withheld, may we live the spirit of pride. With the confidence that a sense of community can banish isolation and loneliness, may we live the spirit of pride. And with the rainbow flag flying high, a sense of beloved community among us, and the joy that comes from making new connections, may we live the spirit of pride.
In our description of today's talk, we said that we would give a brief exploration of the social contributions of queer people and the spiritual gifts of queerness to humanity. We'd like to start with the contributions of queer people in this very congregation. So we invite you now to close your eyes and think of at least one queer person in this congregation that you admire. So right now, I want you to take about 30 seconds and say a silent prayer of gratitude for that person. And at your next opportunity, tell that person how much you appreciate them. Your 30 seconds starts now. Okay. So an LGBTQ person from this congregation that I greatly admire and has made a difference in my life is longtime local activist J.T. Mason. In addition to her long career supporting LGBTQ+ causes and people, she's also one of the founders of Whites for Racial Equity, an organization for which I have the utmost respect. A few more queer people that I admire are ACLU leader Mickey Welsh, Episcopal priest Father John Perez, and my friend Monterey City Councilman Tyler Williamson. As I think of the Black Lives Matter movement re-energized by the senseless killing of George Floyd, I'm particularly grateful for the queer co-founders of that movement, Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors. As I think about my own lifelong quest to reconcile my spirituality and my sexuality, I appreciate the work of Troy Perry, founder of the Metropolitan Community Church, Matt Garrigan and Deborah Johnson, leaders of LGBTQ affirming Omnifaith churches, and Harry Hay, co-founder of the Radical Fairies. As for me, we are bigender twin souls named Stephen and Quasar, and we use they, them, their pronouns. I am of African American heritage, and I affirm that all lives matter when Black lives matter, and Black lives matter when trans lives matter. I am a life member of the NAACP and the editor of the Black Folks Calendar. Spiritually, I am part of the queer rainbow tribe known as Radical Fairies, and I am a co-founder, and a former president of Monterey Peninsula Pride. I was born Black and gay, but I became a Radical Fairy. It began when I was about 8 years old, an only child, playing by myself, probably somewhere around 1972. I was playing astronaut and about to visit another planet when I abruptly had an out-of-body experience in which my consciousness split in two, and I was both in and out of my body at the same time. When I returned to normal, I was convinced that there were actually two of me, and that that other part of me was really from another planet, Uranus to be exact, and that I had met a group of spirit beings I called my elders. This was the start of a permanent childhood fantasy that became the basis for a spiritual worldview as I grew up. My elders revealed my other name, Quasar, the day after my 16th birthday in 1979. In the early 80s, my elders, essentially my spirit guides, decoded my entire childhood fantasy about being Quasar from the planet Uranus. As any astrologer can tell you, Uranus is the queer planet. In astrological terms, it rules homosexuality, eccentrics of every kind, and the age of Aquarius. Even in terms of astronomy, Uranus does its own thing. While the other planets spin around the sun, Uranus rolls. For a short period of time in the 80s, my story made me quite a hit on the San Francisco New Age circuit. However, my elders stopped me in my tracks by informing me that their purpose was to break down the barriers between belief systems, not to enroll people in a new set of exotic beliefs that were designed specifically for me. What was important was the spirituality that it led me to, not the story itself. As I matured, I came to understand that religions are essentially languages and cultural expressions of spirituality. And yet at the same time, one of the fundamental stumbling blocks of humanity is our tendency to ascribe concrete attributes to poetic abstractions, which then become the basis for every type of prejudice, as we demand that reality conform to our models. Thus, the opposition to LGBTQ+ community can be summed up in the phrase, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. We don't fit the model. But the problem is the limitations of the model, not LGBTQ+ people. I met my first radical fairy in the mid-1990s, a playmate who went by the name of Tree. Harry Hay, the gay historian who launched the first gay organization in the U.S., the Mattachine Society, in 1950, participated in gatherings and explored gay spirituality in the 1970s, out of which came the Radical Fairies. The Radical Fairies foster queer-centric community building and networking through gatherings and heart circles and a nature-centered spirituality at communal sanctuaries all over the world. Hay based the Radical Fairies on pre-Christian queer-affirming First Nations of the Americas. Inspired by the medicine man tradition, radical fairies tend to take on a second name as they become part of the community. I already had my second name. The thing that I like best about the radical fairies is the idea that our sexuality and gender expression is an indispensable part of our spirituality, and that as a class of people, gender and sexual minorities have a spiritual purpose for being in the world. Now, this is in stark contrast to most conservative and orthodox strains of monotheistic religions of the West, which tend to agree on our status as perverts and abominations to be cast into the outer darkness and exiled from polite society altogether. Religious oppression continues to be one of the most significant forms of oppression LGBTQ+ people have to contend with all over the world. Now, certainly not all LGBTQ+ people are religious or even spiritually oriented, but we all have to contend with religious-based oppression and discrimination. And that means part of our liberation as a people is dependent on our ability to engage with faith communities that support us and to move them to the next level. Now, some of these struggles will be led by queer folks who are minorities within their predominantly straight, cisgender faith communities, such as queer leaders in the Unitarian Universalist Church. And that is why I am so pleased to learn that UU has been on record affirming the worth and dignity of the LGBTQ people since 1970. I understand that about 5% of UU ministers are themselves members of the LGBTQ+ community, and that 2/3 of your ministries, like UUCMP, have been designated as welcoming congregations, dedicated to learning how to undo, quote, undo homophobia and transphobia in our hearts and minds, our congregations, and our communities. The next level is developing a personal commitment to questioning and challenging heterosexual normativity on an ongoing basis within ourselves and our communities. So, this means going beyond refraining from being nasty to queer people. It means going beyond being nice to queer people. It even means going beyond assimilating queer people into pre-existing organizations or groups, what we radical fairies call hetero-imitation. This is the argument that, with the narrow exception of their gender or sexual difference, queer people are exactly like cisgender heterosexuals, and therefore should simply blend in and reproduce cis straight social circles. Something vital is always lost when minority groups assimilate too completely into majority culture. That is because most members of subordinated groups are gifted with what W.E.B. Du Bois calls double consciousness. Through necessity, they understand the dominant culture as well as their own. Furthermore, they understand the structures of oppression which members of the dominant group has the privilege to be oblivious of. Because we have had a lifetime of struggle to liberate ourselves from oppression, we see that oppression diminishes and impoverishes the lives of oppressors as well as the oppressed. Our liberation will necessarily include your liberation as well. For the vast majority of us who grow up in a gender binary system, not only are we limited to only two substantially opposite ways of being in the world, as heterosexual cisgender men or as heterosexual cisgender women, we aren't even afforded the choice. The choice is made for us based upon the sex that we are assigned at birth. Basically, our society determines who we can love, what we can wear, and how we should act based on an interpretation of our genitals. When put this way, doesn't that sound a little crazy? Well, that's because it is. As I said at the beginning of this talk, as a radical fairy, I believe that queer people have a spiritual purpose for being here. Our too often painfully earned courage and ability to be our unique, fully authentic selves is our spiritual gift to humanity. Our ability and willingness to show up without the temptation to hide our queer sensibilities for the sake of fitting in is ultimately the greatest contribution that we can make. And with that in mind, I wrote a queer prayer for today's Pride Sunday celebration that I'd like to share. Mother, Father, Androgyne, God, Goddess, all that is, thank you for the queer spirit that you have shared with the rainbow children of the world. Blessed is the journey of discovery of our authentic selves, often painful too. Blessed are the effeminate boys and masculine women who dare drink from the gendered cup reserved for the opposite sex. Blessed are the queer, non-binary, and androgynous who fashion their own cups and drink from them freely. Blessed are queer and randy adolescents discovering the pleasures of their own youthful flesh. Blessed are the celibates and asexuals who channel their erotic energies elsewhere. Blessed are the polyamorous whose love cannot be contained in a single vessel. Blessed are the trans folk of every kind and degree whose knowledge of who they truly are holds infinite power. Blessed are the cis, monogamous, and straight allies who celebrate the kaleidoscopic jubilation of their rainbow kin. Mother, Father, Androgyne, God, Goddess, all that is, thank you for the queer spirit of the rainbow children of the world. To whatever degree LGBTQ+ people have managed to free ourselves from the straitjacket, pun intended, of enforced cisgender heterosexual normativity, we can be guides to liberating cisgender heterosexuals from their own oppression as well. So as this talk draws to a close, and as members of this congregation continue the journey of welcoming queer people in dismantling coercive heterosexual normativity, whether queer or not, I invite you to consider a few questions. 1. Does enforced masculinity play a role in you or the men in your life being less likely to seek medical, mental, or emotional support when needed? 2. Have you or the women in your life been less likely to ask for a raise or to assert themselves for fear that their behaviors will be deemed too masculine? 3. Have you or the children in your life ever been bullied or bullied others for misperforming gender roles? 4. Could it be that fears of being labeled gay discourages physical and emotional intimacy between straight male friends? 5. Have you or the straight women in your life ever felt pressure to participate in some level of flirtation in order to avoid being labeled lesbian or frigid? 6. How comfortable would you be having an in-person conversation with a person whose gender you cannot determine. One of the great things about spiritual truths is that they remain true regardless of the context. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." LGBTQ plus liberation is cis straight liberation as well. None of us is free until all of us is free. So that said, no matter where you sit on the gay, straight, male, female continuum, I encourage each and every one of you to have a gay day.
This morning we will sing When the Spirit Says Do, and for our second verse we will sing When the Spirit Says Make, and this is your opportunity to make peace or make a difference or make the world a better place. So I hope you'll sing along with us this morning or even dance. Here we are.
You got to do when the Spirit says do.
What's that?
You got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you got to do, oh Lord. You got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 Got to make when the Spirit says make. You got to make when the Spirit says make. When the Spirit says make, you got to make, oh Lord. You got to make when the Spirit says make. 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 Got to dance when the Spirit says dance. You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you got to dance, oh Lord. You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 Yeah.
Now, please join with me in the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish his chalice, but take its light into our lives, to be the presence of love in the midst of fear, the voice of hope in the face of despair, in the hands of justice, restoring a world worthy of our children. And now for our benediction. If you will, please imagine holding the hands of others. Or hold your own hands. Give yourself a hug, expressing the love that we would give to each of you if we could. As you depart from this place, carry with you the power of this time and the promises you have inwardly made about how you will live and why that will matter. And carry with you Paul Robeson's words of comfort. Sorrow will one day turn to joy. All that breaks the heart and oppresses the soul will one day give place to peace and understanding, and everyone will be free. And now, enjoy this postlude, followed by some closing words with Dennis and Mary Kay, and the opportunity to interact, talk about the service, and chit-chat with the other people who are attending today in small breakout rooms.